Hello, hello. This past February, I became the proud owner of a brand new Kobo Libra color. And this is indeed the one with the physical buttons, which I really wanted. This isn't an ad, but by the way, I am now realizing how this is coming off, and there's a point to this, I swear. This is a purchase that I have been sitting on for quite some time, a few months now. One of the reasons is because I felt like it was almost extraneous. And for some people, it could be because, I do, of course, already have a smartphone. And I have an iPad as well. And so like these are perfectly usable devices on which I can read ebooks, but I could never get into reading ebooks on these types of screens. I think part of the reason is because the screen itself is just a little bit harsh on my eyes, especially for like long reading sessions. And as somebody who has a day job involving staring at a screen for 8 hours, like this is just not something I love to do outside of work if I can help it at least. And I think the other part of it is like the fiddliness specifically of reading on my phone, where I am a pretty fast reader, and so having to kind of flip forward or scroll down, so quickly on such a small screen because of how fast I read is kind of annoying after a while. And so ultimately, the e-ink screen, the sort of focused and very specific use case of an e-reader, and also the Libby integration specifically with the Kobo as well. All of this appealed to me in terms of like why a dedicated e-reader was a good idea. But I think the biggest catalyst for like me finally taking the plunge was the fact that I had an upcoming trip. In March, I went to, and I briefly mentioned this in a previous video, but I did take a trip to Europe. I was there for 10 days. I went to Berlin as well as Amsterdam. In that video, I mentioned how I wanted to read The Picture of Dorian Gray before I left. I did not end up doing that, but what I did end up doing was borrowing the book through Libby, loading it on my Kobo, and then bring this with me. So I read it in the actual apart hotel that I stayed in that was named after Oscar Wilde, who is the author of The Picture of Dorian Gray. And that was just great fun. But anyways, the fact that this is so sort of like travel friendly, the fact that I can carry so many books within this very small package ended up being, I think, the main reason that I thought like a Kobo or e-reader of any sort would be useful. But I was a little bit skeptical about how much I'd end up using it outside of that context. And I'm happy to report that I am now reading more as a result of owning this thing. Discovering that fact has made me really stop and think about how I've evolved as a reader, how my reading habits have evolved. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that along with some thoughts I have on the cult of physical books and how I feel like that is pretty discouraging for newer or yet to be readers. And also how you can combat these external attitudes as well as any potential personal hangups around different reading methods in order for you to be able to read more or better integrate reading into your life if that's something that you are interested in doing. For me, I used to be a physical book only kind of person. I only read physical books, and this wasn't because I like looked down on other methods at all. I really couldn't care less about how you choose to read. Like I said, I didn't own a reader until about 2 months ago, and I didn't enjoy the experience of reading on like a smartphone or a tablet screen. But since I bought this, I've really embraced ebooks. And similarly with audiobooks, I've also really embraced this format over the last year or so. And that in particular really surprised me because I thought that I would hate them. The reason for that is because they are very similar, or at least they were very similar in my head to podcasts. And I just never got along with podcasts. I don't really have a great way of articulating why that is, It's something about the way that my brain just like processes that form of media where it doesn't get along with my brain. And I just find myself either frustrated or annoyed with this delivery method, I suppose, of information slash entertainment. And so it was never something that appealed to me very much, despite my multiple times of trying. So I just assumed that audiobooks were going to be the same way. But much to my surprise, that ended up not being the case. And I'll get a little bit more into the specific ways in which audiobooks I found work for me. But first, I want to talk about physical books and the cult of physical books that kind of exists. Now, I do want to say that they are still my preferred method of reading. I really enjoy having books around my home, just having that sort of presence around. I like being able to browse my bookshelf during downtime and like ponder my next read. I like the satisfaction of physically underlining a particularly captivating quote. I like the sensorial experience of flipping the pages as I make my way through a story. Like, these are all very real things that I do genuinely enjoy about physical books, and it will continue to be my preferred method in most cases. But I have witnessed in some spaces this kind of holier than thou attitude when it comes to physical books, as if they're inherently better or something, or that they are the mark of a true reader. And obviously that is just not the case, right? I'm not gonna get into the whole like, do audiobooks count as reading argument, because that's frankly been done to death on the internet, and I have nothing to add to that. But that's kind of the space that I'm talking about, that I see this attitude towards physical books get pushed. And I get that the aesthetic of a home library is obviously very appealing. You know, we kind of romanticize the aesthetic of a reader, being surrounded by stacks of books. Oh, 1,000 books equals a home library kind of thing. The general look of a reader triggers a very specific type of image in our minds, especially with the rise of booktok, bookstagram, booktube, right? There's a certain look of a reader that is sought after, which only really physical books can provide. I do worry that the glamorization of physical books can corner people into thinking that this is like the most legitimate or the only legitimate form of reading, which of course couldn't be further from the truth. I do want to specifically call out the accessibility aspect of this, because if you have limited access to libraries or bookstores, if your financial situation is unstable, or you don't have a lot of disposable income, if you don't have a lot of physical space in which you can store books, or if you're moving around a lot and you aren't able to carry that many belongings with you when you do, or if you're vision impaired, or you have chronic pain, are you really going to look somebody in the eye and tell them that just because they're unable to hold open a physical book for an hour or two at a time, that they're not allowed to access great literature? Like, no, that's a dick move. You would never do that. It is neither your place nor mine to tell somebody that accessing literature in a different format, aside from physically reading a book, is not valid or not as legitimate. So now that I've gotten that off my chest, where does my evolution as a reader come into all of this? As I had mentioned, I used to only read physical books because I just assumed that that was the best way for me, or the only way that would work for me. And I think if I fell into that pattern of thinking, it's quite likely that some people out there might have done the same thing and made the same types of assumptions with whatever form of reading that they currently do the most of. And so my recommendation is to just experiment for a little while. Put aside these assumptions of how you think you can best read and treat yourself like a little lab rat. Just try a whole bunch of stuff and experiment with how you read. There are a lot of recommendations out there on what to read in order to get back to reading, and I want to focus a little bit on the how. I'm going to share a few things that I learned about myself and my own reading habits through the process of experimentation. And I go through this only as a way to provide an example and not as like a prescriptive, like, this will work for you, because it might not. Like, you might have a completely opposite experience to me in terms of what works. So I just want you to kind of use this as a point of reference, and then through your own trial and error, figure out what works best for you. I learned that when it comes to audiobooks, those work best for me when I'm doing something mundane or something that just doesn't require much brain power in order for me to accomplish. This includes things like chores, vacuuming or dishes or folding laundry. This includes activities like showering or other forms of self-care, putting on a sheet mask and laying down and waiting 20 minutes for it to do its thing. It's also great for things like my commute to work or when I'm taking walks. Like, these are all things in which I have enough brain power to actually focus on the story or whatever is being told to me through the audiobook without losing track or getting like too distracted from it, where I feel the need to constantly have to rewind, because that's something that I don't enjoy as much, is feeling the need to like constantly pull out my phone to rewind just to be able to like follow what's going on. Like, I just, really try to avoid that as much as possible. I want it to be a smooth reading experience. And knowing this, it shouldn't come as a surprise that on the flip side, I cannot listen to an audiobook when I'm actually at work and working. I work as a product/UX designer, and this type of creative work requires a lot of active focus and critical thinking and, making a lot of decisions, just generally requiring me to be like in the zone. And when I am in the zone, I will tune everything else out in order to like maintain the maximum amount of focus that's required for the task that I'm working on. This means that whatever is being narrated to me through the audiobook is just completely lost, and therefore this is a terrible time for me to be able to listen to an audiobook. Additionally, immersive reads don't really work for me. I know they work really well for some people in order to kind of keep them focused or just in general create a more all-encompassing experience. But for me, because I read so quickly, I can't process narration at the speed at which I can read physically. And so that mismatch between the two formats ends up making this experience like not that ideal for me. I also learned that I really enjoy nonfiction when it is delivered via audiobook, especially in the case of memoirs, which are often narrated by the author who wrote them. And so that makes it sort of an extra personal, like more intimate reading experience where like I'm literally hearing the voice of the author, and they're talking about their own life. So it works really, really well. So that's what I've learned about audiobooks and how I make audiobooks work for me. I don't default to it. I don't listen to it all the time. But these are just some ways in which I'm able to take advantage of this particular format and kind of seamlessly slot it into my life, because, all of these activities like the household chores or the self-care and whatnot, these are all things that I'm already doing. So essentially I'm just taking advantage of that time and using it to kind of bring more reading into my life. Now, when it comes to ebooks, of course, we have the advantage of ebooks when you're traveling. Like, that part's pretty obvious, but I was originally unsure of how often I'd be using my kobo outside of that context, and it turns out that I really do prefer it when it comes to reading at night, and especially in bed. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is my lighting situation, and two is my actual vision. My lighting situation, the lamp that I have on my nightstand, I love it, but it has 3 different brightness settings, and they are all not bright enough for me to read comfortably in bed. They're perfectly suitable for anything else I would want it for, that cozy evening light that I aim for, that kind of signals to my brain that we're getting ready for bed. The typical tasks that I need to complete before bed, the lighting is sufficient for all of it, but it is just not that sufficient for reading. For a while, I got around this by actually using a book light, which I also originally bought for travel, because you will not catch me using the airplane reading light that airplanes provide, because good Lord, that thing is so bright and so disruptive to the people around you, I'm not going to be that person. And so I did buy a book light for reading physical books on a plane or just in other situations where I don't want to disrupt the people around me. But it's not like it does feel a little bit silly using it at home. And it's not the best because it's a little clunky. I'm constantly finding myself adjusting the angle of the light itself. I have gotten frustrated because, towards the end of the battery running out, it just gets like lower and lower pretty quickly, the amount of light, the brightness level. And then even when I'm flipping pages, I'm constantly having to like maneuver the page around the light or like move the light, flip the page, move it back into position, just so the angle of light is perfect when I'm reading. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that it's very fussy and I don't love the experience of using it. And so that, combined with the fact that if I don't use it as there's not enough light, makes reading in bed kind of a difficult thing for me to accomplish. But with the Kobo, I don't have to worry about that. There is a backlight on this thing, and that means I can comfortably read it even if it's too dark. And I can also adjust the brightness level of it to be at the perfect level so that I can, again, read comfortably for long periods of time. The second thing I mentioned was my vision. So as you can see, I wear glasses. I am decently nearsighted. I'm in like the -4.5, -4.75 range. But when I reach the very end of the day and I'm in bed, generally I don't want to be wearing my glasses anymore. I've been doing it all day and I want to get cozy. I don't want to when I'm laying on my side, have it smush into my face. I want to put it on my nightstand and not pick it up until the next morning. The only issue with this is that I can't actually see the words on the page when I take my glasses off, unless I'm holding it really close, which is not comfortable. I'm getting ready for bed. I want to be comfortable. The Kobo resolves all of these issues because I can adjust the font size to be big enough for me to read comfortably at a comfortable distance. So yeah, I love it for nighttime reading. I love it for bedtime reading. And this is pretty much a mainstay on my nightstand now when I'm not out carrying it around out and about. So these are all of the things that I've learned through experimentation with both ebooks and audiobooks. But what are the cases in which physical books are still the way to go for me? I found that when I sit down for like a really chunky reading session, I'm talking like 4 or 5 hours or possibly even more than that, I still prefer physical books over everything else. Listening to someone narrate for that long, I don't love that. Holding an ebook for that long, I have done it, but there is something inherently more satisfying about making it through like a big chunk of a physical book when I have that much time to read in one sitting. And so if, it's the day and I'm not worried about the lighting, and I'm in my living room, curled up on my couch, I can get into a very comfortable position with my physical book. I think that is still the peak way of reading for me in that type of situation. And I think I talked about this already, but just even having the visual cue of physical books laying around my home. So having a couple books on my coffee table or having a couple books stacked up on my nightstand. I think the visual of having these physical books is more inspiring to me and acts as a more effective visual cue or visual reminder for me to read than, having my Kobo laying around. Audiobooks don't even have a physical presence. So I can't even utilize that as a way of kind of passively inspiring me to read. I think physical books also have the advantage in that specific case as well. All of these are things that I learned through trying different ways of reading at different times of day, in different situations, and also mixing and matching to create different combinations of these elements. And through all of this experimentation, I found that this is what works for me. But these may not work for you. And if you, like me, have spent most of your life assuming that one way of reading or another, whether that is physical or ebook or audiobook, is the only way that works, but you haven't gone through the steps to experiment and try these different things out, maybe give it a shot and you might just learn something new about yourself and potentially even increase the amount of reading that you're able to get done as a result. Now, you might also just end up right back where you started. And maybe you are able to confirm at the end of all of this that, yep, no, my initial method of reading is still the best method. That's totally fine too. But I think if through this process, you do have the potential of learning new ways to integrate reading into your life, of being able to have new opportunities to learn more about yourself, more about the world, and focus your time and energy on something that nourishes your soul instead of depleting it. Whatever amount of time you spend experimenting to find this out, that is more than worthwhile. So yeah, that's all I had to say about that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this inspired you to try some new things out, maybe explore a different format that you haven't before, and open your mind towards new ways of accessing literature. Let me know in the comments what your preferred way of reading is, and if there's any other tips and tricks that you want to share for how you integrate more reading into your life. And I have to put this disclaimer here. The goal isn't to just like blast through books or prioritize quantity over quality. It's just that I hear the sentiment of like, oh, I don't have time to read, or like, I'd love to be able to read more, or I really want to get back into reading. Like, I hear that type of sentiment a lot. So that's why I'm specifically framing this as like ways to get you to read more. But if reading more is a goal of yours, like I want this to be a method, some ideas, some inspiration to get you to reach that goal. But I don't want you to feel like you're inferior for for not reading as much as like however much you see other people read. If you read one more book than you did last year, like that is a win. So like and subscribe, all that good stuff, and I will catch you later. Bye.